Well, welcome to August's reading recap. August feels like it was a very long time ago because it kind of was. I feel like the summer just flew by, and August was a very, very busy month. Basically, every year my family drives up to Canada and we stay with my grandparents for a couple weeks. They have a sailboat, and so we do a lot of sailing around the lake, and so that was a very, very, very fun August experience, and I tend to have a lot of reading time on the sailboat. There's something just so peaceful about reading on a sailboat with the wind in your face and the water lapping against the side of the boat. It's just so peaceful and the perfect reading environment. So I always get a lot of reading done, and I always pack way too many books because I like to have my options, okay? I think I packed like 8 to 10 books. I did not read 8 to 10 books. I just like to have options. So I have all the books that I kind of want to read, and then it just gives me some variety when I'm there and I finish a book. I guess I just don't like being stuck reading one book when I could read a couple. So I brought a bit of my bookshelf with me. So the first book I read that started with all the travels was Eternal. This is a thick book. I have had this on my bookshelf for quite a while, and I am trying to actually read books that are on my bookshelf. It's a novel concept, right? But I have a lot of books on my bookshelf that I have collected over the years and have not actually read. So I'm trying to do better about actually reading them instead of just getting new books. That said, you will be seeing a ACFW book haul pretty soon, and I collected a lot of new books that I have not read yet. So take that with a grain of salt. But Eternal has been one of those books that I've kind of just been wanting to read for a little while. I always love World War II fiction, and this had a different take on it. My sister got it for me last year for my birthday. We had been walking through a store, and I had pointed out that it looked like a cool book, but I wasn't going to buy it. And then she snuck back, and she bought me the book, which was really sweet. So I've been wanting to read this for a little while, and I even went through and I did, like, the fancy page designs, because I don't know, why not? It was fun. I was bored. And so I've been wanting to read this for a while. It's just such a neat story and a different take. I haven't read a ton of World War II novels that take place in Italy. Usually it's in different sides of Europe, like Germany or Poland or England or even America. And I have not read many in Italy. So this was a really neat switch on it, and she did an amazing job with making it super, super historically immersive and getting into all the politics involved and all the different views of different people groups. So the story follows 3 different characters who actually kind of make up a bit of a love triangle. But I felt like she did a really interesting job with this love triangle because they've been friends since they were children, and as the beginning of the war is starting, they are starting to notice each other. They've grown up together, but they are becoming adults, and both of the boys have their sights set on her, but she has her sights set on one of them, and then things kind of spiral downwards, and then the war happens. And I felt like it was just a really realistic twist on a love triangle and a romance in a war story, because the war happened and everyone was basically just forced into survival. There wasn't time for thinking about romance and thinking about different things. Everyone was just on survival mode. And it was a really interesting take on a romance in the war. One of the things I found just most interesting about the story is just the 3 different characters have 3 different paths, 3 different backgrounds, and it just explores 3 different sides of the war. So we have one character who's all in with the Fascists and Mussolini, and he's just very sold on this agenda. And then there's one who's a Jewish Italian, and he's seeing this different side of the war and the different side of the politics, even though his father was a fascist. And it's just really interesting to see all the different politics involved and how the fascists really betrayed the Jews, and it was just super, super interesting. And then there's Elisabetta, who is the female lead in the story, and she's kind of stuck in between everything, but she has her own issues to deal with, and I'm not going to spoil it because her issues are very broad, and there's a lot of details that happen there, and I cannot give it away. Yeah, so it was just a really cool story, and I really, really enjoyed all the different political aspects. I just love historical fiction when it gets really, really immersive, and this was a good immersive historical fiction novel. After that, I read Before I Let You Go by Kelly Rimmer. Kelly Rimmer is one of my all-time favorite authors in World War II, and I don't think I like her as much in contemporary. I think I'm realizing that as I'm reading some of her contemporary books, which are her older books. I love her in World War II. She writes incredible World War II. I just don't love her contemporary that much. So as always, her writing is amazing. She's a great writer, and in World War II fiction, it's super immersive and super compelling, and it really drives the story, and it's just so good. In contemporary, I just didn't love the characters. I didn't love the storyline elements. This story is about a pregnant drug addict and her sister, and there's just a lot of different elements of a cult that they were in and all sorts of background things. And I just didn't really love the story itself. Some of the characters just really drove me crazy. A lot of the time, I was trying to give them grace and trying to let them grow, and they kind of were growing, but there was just one character where it was Lexi, and she kept second-guessing herself, and she was not talking to her fiance about things, and she was just doing everything on her own, and it was driving me crazy because her fiance was like, I want to be here for you and I want to help you, and she was not letting him, and it happened like 3 times. I'm like, I think it works like once or twice in the story, and then she clicks and she gets it, and then they work together as a team, but it took her forever, and I was like, are they going to call off the engagement at this point? Because he's getting frustrated, and she's on her own. She feels like she's on her own, but she won't let him help her. It was really annoying. I mean, I just felt like the characters were getting very unsympathetic as the story progressed, and they just kept making the wrong choices, which I get sometimes. As a writer, I'm a writer, so I get the whole making the wrong choice, and then they go down this path of learning it. But she just kept making the wrong choice, and everyone kept making the wrong choice, and it was driving me crazy, even though the right choice is like right there. It makes sense for them to make the wrong choice a couple times, but it just was constantly the wrong choice, and it was just driving me crazy. So I did finish the book because I did want to see how it ended, and it did have a redeeming fact to the ending, and I really enjoyed the ending. So it redeemed it. But I almost didn't finish it multiple times. The funny part was that I did read this in Canada, and my grandpa had read it, and so we were discussing it a lot during it, and he was just like, it's just so emotional, and I'm like, yeah, but we read different things, so I kind of like the emotion, but yeah, this is a little too much emotion. It's kind of driving me nuts. But he was the one that kind of had me stick around to the end, because he told me the end redeemed it, and the end was really good. So I was like, well, I have to figure out what the end is now. So I read the whole book, and I don't think I'm going to read it again. And then after that, I read The Ambassador's Daughter. This book I have been trying to read for like 2 months or something. Every time I'm about to start a new book, this is on the list of like, this should be the next book, and then I just can't get in. I think it's like a mind block. So I was like, I just have to read this book and get it done with and finish it. I will say it was really hard to get into. I had a really hard time getting into it, but I think it was my fault because I just was not paying attention to it, and I was not having very good sit down times where I can read a book. I just need like a solid chunk of time to get into a book, and then it's easier to read and get into. But I was just reading like a couple pages at a time, and I just can't get into a book like that. But once I did end up getting into it, I did enjoy it. It felt like a bit more of a slow book, I will say that. But it was an interesting novel, and I enjoyed it. It did have some really interesting twists as the daughter of an ambassador, and some of the rabbit holes that she ended up falling into unintentionally. There was a very strong romance element to this, and I will say, I just wish she dumped Stefan for George. That was just my gut, the whole story, and I still stand by it. I feel like that would have been the right choice. I'm not going to say how it ended or anything like that because that gives everything away. But that was my gut through the whole story. I'm like, just dump Stefan, which is probably a really mean choice. But she just didn't like him. And there was no romance in there. And it was just like, don't marry the guy that you don't like. I feel like that's obvious. But I feel like also a lot of book characters need to be told that for some reason. So it was an interesting book. It felt a little bit slower than I would have liked, but I did read a lot of it in one sitting. Once I got into it, it took me forever to read. The first half took forever to read, and then I read the whole last half in like one sitting. And then lastly, I read A Cast of Stones by Patrick W. Carr. So this is definitely deviated from my usual genre pick, but this was a really interesting medieval style fantasy where the church was kind of like a major magic power in the kingdom. Not necessarily a magic power, but there was a magic element with these stones that they could. It was kind of like reading lots. It was really interesting, but it was an interesting magic system, but it wasn't too overwhelming of a magic system. I am just not a magic system person, and I just don't read a lot of magic system books, so this was a light magic system, which I really enjoyed, and it was really interesting to kind of see it come through. The main character, Errol, was an alcoholic, and he was a drunk, and he was sent on this mission to start the story, and that kind of spiraled everything. So that was the inciting incident, and everything kind of went downhill for him from there, but through a series of events, he ends up in the company of certain people, and he discovers a lot, and a lot just comes to light. He was a little bit more hard to like at the beginning when he was constantly drowning himself in ale, and he just wasn't really focused on all he wanted to do was get out. He just wanted his life to get back to normal. So he's kind of like an unwilling main character, and then after a series of events, he finally gets clean, and he finally starts to see things in a different frame of mind and starts to make connections, and then everything kind of picks up from there. I felt like the story did start picking up speed once Errol is a willing protagonist. It also had a ton of characters, which I feel like is more of a fantasy genre thing. I don't read a ton of books with a ton of characters, and it's just sometimes hard to remember who everybody is. So I had that problem a little bit with this book, and it was just hard to keep track of all the different characters, especially when their names sounded similar, and when I also could not pronounce their names. And that is a problem I have with fantasy books, is just I don't know how to pronounce anybody's name because they all just feel like made up names. Whereas in your standard World War II fiction book, the weirdest thing you're gonna get is like a Polish name, but I have a weird Polish name for my last name, so I'm kind of used to it. So these are all the books that I read this August. It was just a crazy month with a lot of things going on, and I would love to share a bit more of those details with you. I share a lot more about that sort of stuff in my newsletter, where I share a lot more of my writing things that are going on, because there are always a lot of writing things behind the scenes going on, and trust me, there were a lot going on at this point. So I would love to share a bit more about that with you in my newsletter. You can sign up for that in the link in the description, and I would love to have you join me there and to share a little bit more of those details with you. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon for September's reading recap and an ACFW book haul. Also, an ACFW vlog is coming eventually. I just am really swamped and don't have time to edit it at this point, but I will soon. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again soon.